It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
For over a decade, Geoengineeringwatch.org has desperately tried to send out this message. Climate and biosphere collapse will force power structure total desperation. COVID-19 is a manifestation of that desperation. The so-called novel coronavirus is not an act of nature. Its origin is a biolab. There's a rapidly growing science study consensus to confirm the fact that COVID-19 is an engineered bioweapon. 4 DNA strands from HIV, a DNA strand from SARS, all spliced into the COVID-19 virus, making it far more contagious and far more lethal. U.S. mainstream media is not uttering a word about any of this. All, quote, official sources in the U.S. and their mainstream media puppets will continue to do their best to convince populations that the, quote, novel coronavirus is just a result of Chinese wildlife. But does such a conclusion hold up to the frontline facts? Stay tuned. The Global Alert News Hour starts now. 25 million Californians projected to get coronavirus, Governor Gavin Newsom says. From the report, over half the state's population projected to be infected by the COVID-19 virus in 8 weeks. Again, Governor Newsom says. Same Governor Newsom that told me to my face in his office in the Capitol, he was then lieutenant governor, met with Governor Newsom and his top aide, presenting data on climate engineering, its reality, data that they did not dispute. He has done absolutely nothing, remaining completely silent and in denial, while climate engineering programs wreaked havoc on the environment and our respiratory systems, weakening all of us for exactly the kind of respiratory pathogen that is now circulating. Question: if the COVID-19 virus, in fact, is an engineered bioweapon, and rapidly increasing science data makes clear that it is, many ask this question, quote, why would they, i.e. those in power, do this to themselves? I'll answer this question in much more detail later in this broadcast. But first, consider the following. The COVID-19 bioweapon serves those who engineered it and released it. Which countries were hit first and hardest by this novel virus? China, Iran, and Italy. Science data has confirmed that there is more than one strain of COVID-19 in circulation. The strain that started the pandemic in China had characteristics that appeared particularly harmful to Asian populations. The strain that is impacting countries like Iran and Italy is genetically more harmful to those populations. Just a coincidence? You decide. All I ask is for an honest and unbiased investigation first. While doing so, remember and consider the countries that had the biggest targets painted on them by our government. China, of course, Iran, of course, and Italy, because they were building ties with China. Things to consider. Also consider that the COVID-19 bioweapon has now completely eclipsed the public view of almost any other issue, of climate collapse, of biosphere collapse, of crop collapse, of fisheries and ocean collapse, of financial collapse that was already unfolding globally due to many of the factors just stated, of crimes coming to light, like the soon-to-be-released peer-reviewed science study proving that World Trade Center Tower 7, the third high-rise collapse on 9/11, was brought down by controlled demolitions. Any truly patriotic American will take the time to go to the 9/11 Architects and Engineers site to learn more. The crime that kicked off the accelerated insanity on planet Earth, the crime that galvanized the American population to blindly support anything and everything the military-industrial complex wanted to do in its pursuit of resources abroad. Again, if you're truly patriotic, go to the 9/11 Architects and Engineers website. Over 3,000 of the world's top architects and engineers stating conclusively with peer-reviewed study that the official narrative for what happened on 9/11, for what brought down those buildings, is a scientifically proven lie. Investigate. The engineered coronavirus pandemic also facilitates the cover-up of ongoing power structure crimes like the record level of indiscriminate bombing in other countries. For the record, this recent headline is from the Military Times. Quote, U.S. conducted record-setting bomb drops over Afghanistan in 2019. The ongoing global climate engineering weather warfare assault is also being eclipsed by the coronavirus situation. This is truly a paradox, given the fact that the ongoing atmospheric spraying operations related to climate engineering are, in and of themselves, a form of biological warfare due to the toxic elements being used that are raining down through our air column. And in fact, we should logically consider that the solar radiation management operations, i.e. climate engineering, weather warfare, that we see occurring in our skies so frequently, may very possibly or probably be one of the methods that is being utilized to distribute the engineered COVID-19 bioweapon. Again, as former U.S. government scientist, now the second most recognized geoengineer in the world, Ken Caldera, has stated on the record, his job for the government, one of his jobs, to design ways of seeding the clouds with pathogens to infect the population below. Week after week, I'm going to keep bringing that up because that's what our government does behind the scenes. That's why they have 400 plus bioweapons all over the globe. More on that later in this broadcast. And for the record, of course, many governments engaged in this sort of nefarious activity in order to carry out their own agendas and objectives. I've reported on the following statement many times in the past. Forgive me for doing so again, but it is necessary and more relevant than ever at this time. Listen carefully to this statement by Zbigniew Brzezinski, former advisor to a half-century of U.S. presidents. Brzezinski only passed away in 2017, incidentally the same year that the U.S. lifted its ban on experimenting with lethal pathogens to make them more dangerous. More on that later in the broadcast as well. But here's Brzezinski's statement. Listen carefully, even if you've heard it before. Quote, major world powers, new and old, face a novel reality. While the lethality of their military might is greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historic low. To put it bluntly, Brzezinski states, in earlier times it was easier to control 1 million people than to physically kill 1 million people. Today, Brzezinski states, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people, end quote. Keeping Brzezinski's quote in mind, consider this quote from the former director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. He said this, quote, the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that the human creatures, i.e. the human race, could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. Again, from the former director of the FBI. As I have stated on broadcasts and on the record for over a decade, climate and biosphere collapse will force power structure total desperation. This scenario is unfolding by the day, and the bioweapon labeled COVID-19, again, is a manifestation of that desperation. The most critically important breaking headline reports in a moment. First, to each and every individual that is doing their best to stay informed, to wake others, and to help turn the tide, thank you. More than I can say. Even at this late hour, it is our collective efforts that can yet make a difference. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour, episode number 241, March 21st, 2020. In this broadcast, news that covers the issues we must face if we're to have any chance of changing course. Issues that are unfolding rapidly, as we all now know. This commercial-free frontline news broadcast is brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org and paid for by geoengineeringwatch.org. This news hour is broadcast throughout Northern California, 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Saturday mornings from 6 to 7, Sunday mornings, same time slot, repeat broadcast. Recordings of this broadcast can be found at geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent top stories and radio sections. The latest Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials can be ordered from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. As I so frequently try to remind, having credible printed materials is exponentially more effective at waking those around you than anything you can verbally communicate. A picture is worth 1,000 words, as the proverb goes. As I cover the most dire and current reports in this broadcast, keep this in mind. All of us are needed in the critical battle to sound the alarm. All of us. Social media censorship of essential information is becoming draconian. One way around this is for all of us to use emailing as a way to share the most important data links. It is essential to forward credible data only with a simple and inarguable introduction message, such as this, quote, "Please investigate the attached information, which is a core part of the existential challenges we face," end quote. Again, just an example, but send credible information with a simple, straightforward, and grounded introduction message. Less is more in this case. Find article authors, agency officials, elected officials, journalists, heads of organizations. The list is endless. If all of us help to canvass email such contacts, we will draw ever closer to a critical mass of awareness. And reaching a critical mass is the only way forward in this fight, to expose and halt the insanity and to alter our current course. Headlines from numerous sources. Infected people without symptoms might be driving the spread of coronavirus more than we realized. Question: what else could be driving the spread of coronavirus? Sprayed aerosol dispersions. As the engineered coronavirus assault unfolds, remember and consider that the ongoing mortality being inflicted by the climate engineering atmospheric spraying operations, both in nature and in human populations, exponentially exceeds the damage and danger from the engineered virus so far. Further, the constant inhaling of the highly toxic inflammatory climate engineering particles makes us all far more susceptible to respiratory infections like the COVID-19 bioweapon. The population needs to look up and to consider how much material, toxic material, it takes to blot out so much of our formerly blue sky. And all of those unimaginably microscopic particles that are part of the climate engineering dispersions are raining down through our air column to be inhaled and absorbed by all living organisms. And again, we can't know when and where these operations may be used and may have been used to further distribute pathogens. Stop and consider that this scenario I've just outlined may have been used for far longer than any of us would like to believe to distribute less lethal pathogens. More on that later in this broadcast. From CNN News, this headline, quote, "There's an unlikely beneficiary of coronavirus, the planet." This report referred to the reduction of pollution due to the increasing societal and industrial lockdowns. But again, there are other obvious beneficiaries of the coronavirus outbreak. But will any significant percentage of the US population be willing to assemble the pieces of the puzzle when the completed picture is beyond what most are willing to even contemplate? In the meantime, what is our government currently engaged in? Mailing free checks to the population from the printed money from thin air private central bankers. This tactic of free money is nothing more than an absurd bread and circus distraction from the converging catastrophes that are closing in on us all. And so many of these catastrophes, like the COVID-19 bioweapon, are completely engineered. Will the 2020 census go forward? As of now, the field operations have been halted. But does that matter? Remember the 2010 census, in which, for unspecified reasons, our government GPS located every single citizen's front door. Why? And let's remember this, the 2.4 billion rounds of .40 caliber hollow point purchased by so-called Homeland Security and other governmental agencies in 2012. Question, shouldn't we inquire why these governmental agencies needed so much ammunition? Over 6 bullets for every man, woman, and child in this country. Why in the world would they need so much ammunition? Another question, are the brown shirts coming to America, or are they already amongst us? That question is not hard to find an answer to if any objective investigation is done. Another question, would segments of society willfully oppress and or abuse other segments of society because they have been ordered to do so by completely out of control governments that are ruled by what can only be considered state-sponsored mafia syndicates? Let's again consider the Milgram experiments for those that are unfamiliar with what they were. These experiments were extraordinarily revealing in regard to unfortunate traits in human nature that have been a core part of leading us to the dark place we now find ourselves in. The Milgram experiments on obedience to authority figures was a series of social psychology experiments conducted by Yale University psychologist Stanley Milgram. The experiments measured the willingness of study participants, men from a diverse range of occupations with varying levels of education, to obey a perceived authority figure who instructs them to perform acts conflicting with their personal conscience. Participants were led to believe that they were assisting in an experiment in which they had to administer electric shocks to a, quote, learner. These mock electric shocks were ordered to be gradually increased to levels that would have been fatal had they been real. The experiment found, unfortunately, that a very high proportion of subjects would fully obey the instructions of those they believed to be in authority positions, no matter how immoral and even murderous those instructions were. If the human character flaw of blind, unquestioning obedience to criminal authority is not broken, if a majority of the human race does not rise to the level of following their God-given sense of reason and conscience above all else, we have no chance. On this same theme, the human race continues to collectively march toward its own near-term demise. Another example, the 5G global assault continues to accelerate. Non-ionizing radio frequency microwave radiation is absolutely harmful. This is scientifically indisputable. Consider the following statement from Dr. Anthony Miller, advisor to the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, who states that radiofrequency microwave radiation, which is non-ionizing radiation, fully meets the criteria to be classified as a Group 1 carcinogenic to humans, based on scientific evidence associating radiofrequency exposure to cancer development and cancer promotion, end quote. And for the record, radiofrequency microwave radiation also wreaks havoc with our immune system, weakening us, which in turn makes us all much more susceptible to countless pathogens, including the one we face now. And climate engineering utilizes extraordinarily powerful radiofrequency microwave transmissions to manipulate the electrically conductive particles in our atmosphere, again, which may also be carriers for these pathogens. The web of darkness we find ourselves in, the web of absolute insanity, is truly incomprehensible. But we must face it, we must deal with it, we must expose it and stop it if we're to have any chance of saving anyone, anything. How much radiofrequency microwave radiation are we actually being exposed to? Let's ask that question at this time. From a publication titled The Biological Effects of Weak Electromagnetic Fields, Problems and Solutions by Andrew Goldsworthy, this statement can be found. Our present exposure to man-made microwaves is about 1,000,000 billion times greater than our natural exposure to these frequencies. That's, by the way, that number is a 1 followed by 18 zeros. Microwave currents pass through the membranes of cells and tissues and damage cell contents. The science statistics and science conclusions I have just covered should put this microwave exposure problem into perspective. And even now, how many are jumping up and down, praising this release of 5G around the world, on top of all the other frequencies that we already face? Truly, we live in an asylum. In regard to subjects and issues like the radiofrequency microwave assault, issues like the ongoing highly toxic atmospheric spraying operations, and issues like the bioweapons, COVID-19, this question often is asked, quote, why would they, i.e. those in power, do this to themselves, end quote. This question is most consistently posed by those who can't yet bring themselves to believe what is actually unfolding around us. Thus, they often use this question as an excuse to avoid any objective investigation of the facts. First, who are, quote, they? All roads lead to those who control the flow of money, those who control the central bankers. The central bankers have long since printed whatever they want, for whatever they want, money from thin air, fiat money. They finance militaries, thus they, in a sense, own countries. Next, on the question of why would those at the top do this to themselves, i.e., detonating 2,000 nuclear bombs, contaminating everything on Earth, spraying the entire planet with toxic materials for the climate engineering weather warfare, spreading pathogens, so many more issues. The question is asked repeatedly, why would they do this to themselves? And as I have outlined in countless broadcasts over the last 20 years, first, we are not dealing with sanity. Psychoanalysis of the various personality types who crave and covet total control confirm that they almost always have this mental deficiency, a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. The craving for total power is an addiction. Those at the top are inarguable addicts. Question: do the hopelessly addicted consider that their addiction will eventually kill them? Generally, the answer is no. And in this case, from a global perspective, criminal cabals that rule the world are no different than a cancer. Does a cancer intend to kill its host? Is that the goal of the cancer? No. Cancer is in essence a mindless, soulless, heartless entity that seeks its own expansion at any cost. The consequences are not considered. And unless such a cancer is cut out of the body, the host will die. And in the case of global populations as a body, this can only be done by an awakened population that has committed itself to the greater good, to dealing with the insanity that we collectively face. The only chance we have is for those who have so far blindly and obediently served the collective insanity. They need to stand down. Please stand down. Consider that you are morally obligated to refuse immoral orders. It is not too late to do what is right. This reminder message to our U.S. military brothers and sisters, without whose help, again, we have no chance. You have taken an oath to protect your citizens from all threats, foreign and domestic. Moving on to reports and information that Americans have been well trained to ignore and reject without even investigating. Why was China's response to the COVID-19 outbreak so radical and draconian? Because China recognized COVID-19 as a bioweapon that posed an unthinkable and unimaginable danger. As I cover headline reports that most understandably don't want to hear, let alone consider, all I am asking, all I have ever asked for, is honest investigation, which takes courage. It takes a commitment to follow the facts wherever they may lead. From multiple sources, this headline report: China says U.S. military role likely in coronavirus outbreak. Excerpt from that report: the U.S. military may have triggered the coronavirus outbreak in the Chinese city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus epidemic, widening the trade-centered war between the two nations to the territory of a biological attack. Please stay with me through these facts. Don't knee-jerk react, which is exactly what those in power want us to do. And again, all of these reports are not in any way to condone any other government, not at all. But don't we have a responsibility? In fact, our survival depends on us examining what those controlling our own government are doing before we can point the finger at anyone else. From the UK Sun and other sources, bio-war. Iran blames coronavirus outbreak on, quote, U.S. biological attack. Continue with me through these headlines, please, before you try to form a picture based on a reaction that we are all programmed to have when we hear anything that conflicts with our chosen set of beliefs. Before you do that, please follow me through with these dots so that you can have enough pieces of the puzzle to form a picture that has some verifiable validity to it. From SputnikNews.com, Iranian doctors urge neighboring countries to shut down U.S. biological labs within their borders. A group of 101 Iranian doctors has penned a letter addressing the leaders of Afghanistan, Georgia, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan to take, quote, immediate action to destroy all of the U.S. biolaboratories in their countries amid fears that the coronavirus pandemic may have been spread deliberately as a form of biological warfare. Let me ask this question. What would U.S. civilians and citizens do if China, Afghanistan, Georgia, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, if they all had biolabs, level 4 biolabs in our country? How would we feel about that? We have to get over this kind of hypocrisy where We are literally surrounding countries with our bases, like Iran, and Americans, unfortunately, through programming and conditioning, have a view that how dare Iran put their country in the middle of all our bases? Does that make sense? Now, we put all our bases around their country. Would we tolerate that? Would we tolerate Iranian and Chinese bases along the Canadian border, along the Mexican border? Of course not. But yet Americans expect those countries to feel okay about what's being done to them. The hypocrisy has to go. We have to look through a clear lens. We have to summon the courage to examine available facts, no matter how unpleasant those facts are. Question: is it actually possible that the COVID-19 bioweapon originated in the U.S.? Would the U.S. government and its allies really behave so murderously towards ongoing target countries like Iran and China, all in the pursuit of natural resources and regional control? Consider this additional report on this subject from Common Dreams and other sources. Quote, literally weaponizing coronavirus, end quote. Despite one of the world's worst outbreaks of deadly virus, U.S. hits Iran with brutal new sanctions. From that report, as Iranians are ravaged by the coronavirus, the U.S. is complicit in their death. This is a crime against humanity. Yes, sanctions kill. Even without a virus, the U.S. illegal sanctions against Iraq for the WMD that Iraq didn't even have are estimated to have killed 500,000 children. Americans don't know this. They need to know this. They need to look at these facts. They need to examine the two consequences of the actions that our government is taking in our name around the world, so they might better understand why so many in other countries are so afraid of and so angry towards the United States. Pompeo last Friday repeatedly referred to the coronavirus as, quote, the Wuhan virus, pointing to the Chinese city where the virus first emerged. But consider the simplicity of Pompeo's propaganda, that we should assume, because the engineered pandemic first came to light in a specific region, that we should then blindly assume that region is the actual source of the bioweapon. Let's re-examine some relevant facts that the U.S. populations are not being told about. First, the 2019 Military World Games, officially known as the 7th CISM Military World Games, was held from October 18th to the 27th, 2019, last year, in the capital of Hubei province in Wuhan, China. This is where the outbreak started. Hundreds of U.S. military personnel were there at that exact location. Starting on that exact same day as the Wuhan event, October 18th. And remember the fact that the U.S. military was there as I connect more dots. Same day, October 18th last year, Event 201, a pandemic exercise to illustrate preparedness. The Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted Event 201, a high-level pandemic exercise, a drill that addressed a global coronavirus pandemic. Just a coincidence? Again, on the exact same day as the start of the Wuhan event that had hundreds of U.S. military personnel present, October 18th, 2019. Keep this 2017 headline in mind also, which I covered in a previous broadcast. From numerous sources, a U.S. federal ban on making lethal viruses is lifted. Again, lifting the former ban on making lethal viruses effectively made biowarfare experimentation completely legal for the United States and in the United States. Now, let's venture deeper into the rabbit hole. Let's connect more dots. This report from numerous sources, quote, who made the coronavirus? The most commonly reported mainstream media account of the creation of the coronavirus suggests that it was derived from an animal-born microorganism found in a wild bat that was consumed by an ethnic Chinese resident of Wuhan. But there appears to be evidence to dispute that in the adjacent provinces in China, where wild bats are more numerous and have not experienced outbreaks of the disease. Because of that and other factors, there has also been considerable speculation that the coronavirus did not occur naturally through mutation, but was rather produced in a laboratory, possibly as a biological warfare agent. The report goes on to state this. Several reports suggest that there are components of the virus that are related to HIV. There are science reports to state that. 4 strands of HIV DNA woven into this virus. HIV that could not have occurred naturally And again, there is also a strand of the SARS virus DNA, spliced into the COVID-19 virus. This virus has either been developed or produced to be a bioweapon. Official U.S. mainstream media narratives suggest that the virus's escape from the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab into the animal and human population could have been accidental. Technicians who work in such environments are aware that, quote, leaks from laboratories occur frequently. Keep that in mind as I go through this report. The report continues. There is, of course, and inevitably another theory, another possibility that numerous dots connect to point toward. There is speculation that as the Trump administration has been constantly raising the issue of growing Chinese global competitiveness as a direct threat to American national security and economic dominance, must we not also consider the possibility that Washington has created and unleashed the virus in a bid to bring Beijing's growing economy and military might down a few notches? It is, to be sure, hard to believe that even this administration would do something so reckless, but there are precedents for that type of behavior from previous administrations. In 2005 through 2009, the American and Israeli governments secretly developed a computer virus called Stuxnet, which was intended to damage the control and operating systems of Iranian computers being used in that country's nuclear research program. Admittedly, Stuxnet was intended to damage computers, not to infect or kill human beings, but concerns that it would propagate and move to infect computers outside Iran proved to be accurate as it spread to thousands of PCs outside Iran in countries as far-flung as China, Germany, Kazakhstan, and Indonesia. And indeed, evidence indicates that the computers at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, the safety systems were dysfunctional and incapable of preventing that disaster because they were infiltrated with the Stuxnet virus. And how many, thus, should we consider that virus produced by the US and Israel? Historical fact, how many has it killed and how many will it kill as the Fukushima disaster continues to expand? Consider the downstream ramifications from all of this. Again, remember what I covered in the beginning of this broadcast. The clinically insane that inevitably run the world don't consider the consequences of their actions ultimately even to themselves. The report continues. Here is another factor that may shed more light on what has happened in China. Scientists at Israel's Galilee Research Institute are now claiming that they will have a vaccine against coronavirus in a few weeks, which will be ready for distribution and use within 90 days. The institute is claiming that it has been engaged in 4 years of research on coronavirus funded by Israel's Ministries of Science and Technology and Agriculture. They are claiming that the virus is similar to the version that has infected humans, which has led to breakthroughs in development through genetic manipulation. Isn't that a coincidence? They've been working on the same virus for over 4 years. More from the report. If one considers that it's possible the United States had a hand in creating the coronavirus at what remains of its once extensive biological weapons research center in Fort Detrick, Maryland, it is very likely that Israel was a partner in the project. Helping to develop the virus would also explain how Israeli scientists have been able to claim success at creating a vaccine so quickly, possibly because the virus and a treatment for it were developed simultaneously. In regard to the Fort Detrick biolab, which was engaged in level 4 pathogen experimentation, the lab was shut down last August by the US CDC because of a pathogen leak or escape and the probable exposure and infection of US military personnel. And let's go back to what I covered in a previous broadcast. The 1918 so-called Spanish flu, which was not a flu at all, and which science and historical data indicates came from Fort Riley in the US. Please investigate everything I'm stating. We are swimming in a sea of lies and deception. Major agendas are being carried out, and we will all soon suffer the consequences if we do not wake up completely and immediately. Continuing from this report titled, quote, Who Made the Coronavirus? There is the national security foreign policy issue as seen from both Jerusalem and Washington. it is difficult to explain why coronavirus has hit one country in particular, other than China, very severely, and that country is Iran, the often cited enemy of both the US and Israel. The number of Iran's coronavirus cases continues to increase. Iran now had the second highest number of deaths behind China. Now it's third highest. I believe Italy has surpassed Iran on deaths now. And let's remember, Italy was also unknown to most Americans in the crosshairs of the US government because of their aligning and building relations with China. More from the report. Numerous Iranian members of parliament have also tested positive amid a growing number of officials that have contracted the disease. This even includes the vice president of Iran. The usual suspects in the United States are delighted to learn of the Iranian deaths. Mark Dubowitz, executive director of the Washington-based but Israeli government-connected Foundation for Defense of Democracies, acronym the FDD. And again, these types of titles give the public the impression that there's some sort of benevolence in these groups. Could not be further from the truth. We have to look past those very deceptive titles for such groups and agencies. But this individual, Mark Dubowitz, again, executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, US-Israeli-based group, think tank, boasted on Twitter that, quote, coronavirus has done what American economic sanctions could not. Dubowitz went on to state that the virus has, quote, shut down Iranian non-oil exports, end quote. An Iranian government spokesman responded to this statement by Dubowitz, saying that, quote, it's shameful and inhuman to cheer for a deadly virus to spread and to enjoy seeing people suffer for it, end quote. Dubowitz followed up with an additional taunt that Tehran has, quote, spread terrorism in the Middle East and is now, quote, spreading the coronavirus. And this fact, as I've cited so many times, a statistical fact. It's not to agree with the Iranian government, not to side with them, not to condone them, not to support them. But it's a statistical, historical fact. In over 200 years, the Iranian government has invaded exactly no one. In that same time frame, the United States military and its allies have invaded, toppled, and/or occupied nearly 100 nations. Something that should be remembered. The report ends with this. So we have a choice. We can choose to believe coronavirus occurred naturally, or that it came out of a lab in China, or from a lab in Israel or the United States. If one suspects Israel and/or the United States, the intent clearly would have been to create a biological weapon that would damage two nations that have been designated as primary enemies of the United States and Israel. But the coronavirus cannot be contained easily, and it is clear that many thousands of people will die from it. Unfortunately, as with the Stuxnet computer virus, once the genie is out of the bottle, it is incredibly hard to put back in. And in regard to the current lockdown being exercised over U.S. populations, as I've stated on so many broadcasts, with climate and biosphere collapse accelerating, the U.S. population is not only expendable to those in power, but a rapidly increasing liability. And this virus provides the premise to lock down and completely control societies. And on that note, I want to read this comment from last week's geoengineering.org Global Alert News post. This is from Italy. Here's the comment. From total lockdown in central and southern Italy and possibly coming to a town near you. Now we cannot even go to get food at the shop without, quote, special permission. We have a form that has to be downloaded and printed off, filled out, and ready to take every time you need to go out. Other than that, everyone must stay at home. You must have the form ready for the police check. The police will look at it, check it, and sign it. On the form, you must give the following: your full name, where you were born, the address that you reside at, your cell phone number, your document identification number, the place you are traveling from, and the place you are traveling to. The journey can only take place if it is necessary for your work, a necessary situation like buying necessities, for purposes of a health appointment or a visit to the pharmacy, or to return to your place of residence or a place where you live. If it is for work, you have to give when you start and when you intend to return to re-enter your home. You have to date the form and give the hour of signing. It is to be signed by the person and the police operative. Only one person can go out with this form, and they must wear a mask and gloves. It feels like a war situation. Or is this fascism and a police state? Question mark. End of statement. That's exactly where we are heading. It's been coming for a very long time. At geoengineeringwatch.org, we have tried to sound the warning for a very long time, but it is imperative we remember that unless so many in our society choose to become like the brown shirts in Nazi Germany, if our citizens refuse to carry out immoral orders, if our law enforcement, if our military refuses to do the same, those in power can't do what they are trying to do. And this is not to say that we don't have a real emergency and that we don't have to take certain measures to deal with that emergency. We definitely have a real emergency now on many fronts. It's not just the virus. We face climate and biosphere collapse. Again, all of this is connected. But what I'm saying is we must shine the light on what started all of this, what's fueling all of it, who's behind all of it. We must shine that light, and that effort will take all of us. From numerous sources, German officials discussed the U.S. attempt to buy exclusive rights to coronavirus vaccine. Isn't that interesting? How many Americans know that? That the current administration tried to buy exclusive rights to a potential vaccine so that the U.S. would have exclusive control. So much of what's unfolding is about that, control. From numerous sources, Denmark passes law enabling forced coronavirus vaccinations, even though a vaccine doesn't exist yet. And to those that are still trying to convince themselves that they know what elements are actually contained in vaccinations, and for those that are still trying to convince themselves that vaccinations are, in general, safe, you haven't investigated the facts. Please do so. From numerous sources, the U.S. military has repeatedly conducted dangerous biowarfare experiments on Americans. This is historical fact. This is not my opinion. Please look it up. On September 20th, 1950, a U.S. Navy ship just off the coast of San Francisco used a giant hose to spray a cloud of microbes into the air and into the city's famous fog. The military was testing how a biological weapon attack would affect the 800,000 residents of that city. How many Americans know this? And this is the tip of the iceberg. The people of San Francisco had no idea. And again, on the subject of spraying a biological weapon into the clouds to infect the populations below, forgive me for again pointing to former government scientist, U.S. Defense Department scientist Ken Caldera, who stated on the record, recorded, geoengineeringwatch.org has this original recording, as I've played in previous broadcasts, stated on the record that one of his jobs for the U.S. government was to engineer methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. And interestingly enough, Ken Caldera is now the world's second most recognized geoengineer. All of these dots connect. Let's consider that science studies indicate that the coronavirus does best in cold conditions. In the full sun, the COVID-19 virus is very vulnerable. This is especially true given the fact that Earth's now highly damaged ozone layer is allowing UVC radiation to bombard the surface of the planet. For the record, UVC radiation is germicidal and is used to sterilize labs. So with all of this in consideration, why are the climate engineers working overtime to keep blocking the sun from so much of the US, indeed so much of the world? The latest engineered winter weather warfare, triggering winter weather whiplash, is being titled Winter Storm Pearl. Again, many agendas being carried out. There are many objectives with all of these operations. The engineered winter events convince populations that yes, even though we really haven't had a winter in Northern California, that it's been 75 and 80 most of the winter, suddenly snow appears, so everything must be fine, right? Wrong. Engineered winter weather events. Countries all over the world are being subjected to the climate engineering onslaught. But in regard to the engineered winter events, the creation of winter weather whiplash by seeding cloud moisture with patented chemical ice nucleation elements, and by far the most consistently climate engineered winter weather assault is on the U.S. The eastern half of the U.S. lower 48, in fact, has been the most anomalously less warm region on the planet for 5 years in a row. This is not an act of nature. It's a result of climate engineering. Last week on the West Coast, the climate-engineered winter weather was being carried out, from much of the winter in California again being in the 70s and 80s to winter weather whiplash, snow and Redding, and then bouncing back to 70s. Again, search the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. More history on biological warfare. This headline from 1977. U.S. Army conducted 239 secret open-air germ tests on the U.S. population. Please look it up. Don't believe me. Here's another bioweapon to investigate. This is connected to U.S. military bioweapon development. Mycoplasma. Search mycoplasma as a weapon. How long has this potentially been sprayed on U.S. populations for experimentation, preparation? Those in power have always known that the current paradigm was not sustainable. The population has been programmed not to see that fact, although it's becoming painfully evident now. But those in power at the very top have prepared for this for so very long. And I know there's many good men and women in our U.S. military. I recognize that. We are working with some at geoengineeringwatch.org. But all those in the military need to investigate what's happening, what they're being used for. That's what we're asking. Don't blindly believe whatever you're told by those at the top of the power structure that are simply using you for mercenary purposes to serve their objectives and their agendas that are not benevolent, agendas that absolutely are in the worst interest of the U.S. population, in fact, of the entire world. Let's ask this question again. In regard to the current pandemic, who benefits? Here's another example from globalresearch.ca. In a Europe closed down by the coronavirus, the EU, the European Union, opens its doors to the U.S. military. Could the defender become the invader of Europe? From that report, 30,000 U.S. soldiers, who with 10,000 others already on site and 7,000 NATO allies, are presently arriving in Europe from the USA. They are to deploy throughout the European region, the report states. The U.S. forces are bringing with them 33,000 pieces of military equipment, from personal weapons to Abrams assault tanks. Something to consider. Yes, there are many, many objectives being carried out with this engineered viral pathogen. More headlines from marketwatch.com. This headline report: how long will the coronavirus last? Prepare yourself for a long ride. End of headline. The report states the reality of the global COVID-19 pandemic in America has started to set in. Yes, it has. And we are in for a ride. From mintpress.news, amid the worst public crisis in decades, and I would argue in history, the administration of the United States has found the time to bomb Iraq, the time and money to bomb Iraq. And again, record bombing in Afghanistan going on too. And do the American public have any idea about this? Let's stop for a moment to consider the now decades-long weather warfare that has also been waged against Iran and every other Middle Eastern country that was named as a target by the U.S. government only days after the 9/11 New Pearl Harbor false flag event was executed. And these countries have been on the floor of the UN, the leaders of Iran on the floor of the UN, stating on the record that their country's precipitation, their rain, was being cut off by NATO weather modification operations. Same thing is happening to the U.S. West right now. There's no question. We can see on satellite imagery, the rain for the western U.S. is being systematically cut off with climate engineering operations that we can see clearly again on satellite imagery. Yes, some rain comes in, it'll drip and drizzle for a few days. Occasionally there'll be some heavy showers, but overall, the rain deficiencies continue, the crop collapse continues, the destroying of the ozone layer continues, the toxifying of soils, waters, and our breathable air column continues. Is this not an assault against the American population every bit as much as the assault has been waged against the Iranian population and other populations all over the globe by climate engineering, weather warfare? As President Johnson stated so emphatically on film and on the record in 1962, he who controls the weather controls the world. And that's what all of this is about: the virus, the control of weather, and so many other activities. View Johnson saying this at the beginning of this broadcast. Every week I keep it there because the impact of that statement he made is so incredibly profound. I'm sure that those in power wish that Johnson had not ranted and raved in that manner for the whole world to see. Weather warfare has been and is wreaking havoc on unsuspecting populations all over the world. The Earth's entire climate system has been completely derailed by countless forms of human activity, yes, but climate engineering operations are by far the most disruptive and destructive. Though there are more obvious forms of engineered climate catastrophe like the unprecedented floods and firestorms that can be directly attributed to climate engineering's complete disruption of the hydrological cycle, climate engineering disruptions to the hydrological cycle can be and likely are a factor in the creation of much less obvious consequences. Even the epic plagues of locusts that are currently devouring desperately needed food crops in already starving countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Consider this title from WND.com. Quote, second wave of locusts could hit 1/3 of the world's nations, warning states. Report says many thousands of people were already in the grip of food shortages due to either drought or flooding in the last 12 months before the crop destruction caused by a first wave of vast swarms of desert locusts in East Africa and Pakistan. The report further stated at this time it could be 400 times worse. The United Nations estimates 20 million are facing the threat of severe food insecurity. Now listen carefully and let's tie this into weather warfare. Those who are controlling the climate system. Biggest military in the world. Who is that? This report further states crops are due to be harvested in the next few weeks, but already in Uganda, the government has warned the country to prepare for impending double disaster as unusually heavy seasonal rains are expected. The severe rains will increase the locust plague. Connect the dots. Almost out of time. Other headlines, again, biosphere collapse. Amazon rainforest reaches point of no return. Multiple sources. Also from multiple sources. Quote, a rare, severe ozone hole develops over the Canadian Arctic. Not so rare. We are being bombarded with UVC radiation, not being told. Ozone layer is collapsing. Another headline. Could coronavirus collide with wildfire season? California is preparing for it. Gavin Newsom knows that climate engineering is going on. He knows the ramifications, and he has said exactly nothing. A part of the cabal every bit as much as every other power structure puppet politician. All a part of the cabal, all pretending to care when in fact they are facilitating the agendas and objectives of the cabal and not disclosing to the public facts which they know, facts which I know Gavin Newsom knows because, again, I met with him in his office, full presentation, data presented, they couldn't argue and didn't argue with any of the facts, and exactly nothing has ever been disclosed. As the ship sinks, i.e. planet Earth, at a rapidly increasing pace, many global insiders have left their posts in the desperate attempt to find a safe place to hide. Newsflash, there is no place safe on a dying planet. Jeff Bezos, seen in New Zealand. Bill Gates has stepped down. Going back to several months ago, this headline, quote, why have more than 1,300 CEOs left their post? 1,300. Another headline, tech CEOs are stepping down in record numbers. Why? That's not hard to figure out, is it? More headlines from so-called science sources like Scientific American trying to blame what's happening on a loss of habitat. From Scientific American, destroyed habitat creates the perfect conditions for coronavirus to emerge, pointing the finger everywhere but where it belongs. That's what these types of agencies do for the power structure. We are all drowning in rising seas of disinformation, deception, and outright delusion. I'm almost out of time in this on-air broadcast. There is a report that it is imperative that I cover. I will touch on it in this broadcast, elaborate on it next week. But we now have a science peer-reviewed report that states this. A new study published in the prestigious journal Vaccine, a peer-reviewed medical journal, has indicated that the influenza vaccine, the flu vaccine, may increase the risk of infection from other respiratory viruses, a phenomenon known as virus interference. Summary. This report indicates that the flu vaccine may make us more susceptible to contracting and spreading viruses like coronavirus. I will cover this report in more detail in next week's broadcast. I am out of time at this moment. Please, eyes wide open, eyes to the horizon. For over a decade, Geoengineeringwatch.org has warned that countless factors on which our collective survival depends are far past the breaking point. climate and biosphere collapse are key. Both factors have and are further fueling power structure total desperation. The COVID-19 bioweapon is a shocking manifestation of that desperation. If we collectively have any chance of changing course, we must collectively summon the courage to clear the lens through which we see the world. We must reprioritize. We must fully focus on the fight for the greater good, on investigating frontline facts without bias, preconception, or ideology. We must fully expose any and all that are either actively or passively participating in the insanity. And to those that are blindly following immoral orders, the world and the web of life are completely depending on you to stand down, to stop following the immoral dictates of empire. Again, never forget, we're not helpless. Those in power are not gods. Make your voice heard in the critical battle to sound the alarm. Fully awakening populations, which includes the U.S. military personnel, is the great imperative of our time. We must have our U.S. military brothers and sisters on our side, a side of sanity. This is the only way forward. Share credible data from a credible source. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Make your voice heard. Make every day count. Time is not on our side. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.